Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reclaim, Remain, Rebuild, a series on housing justice. We're just gonna, go over a few things at the beginning here. I'll just lay out how we're gonna do the beginning of this meeting. We got, Max Rameau from formerly Take Back the Land. Did a lot of awesome stuff in Miami in the last recession. He's doing a lot of cool stuff last few years. He came here last year. R2S sponsored a series with him, so we thought we'd have him back on to talk more about reclaiming property, houseless rights. We also have Ibrahim from Right to Survive, who will talk about his experience starting autonomous houseless villages and the work he's been doing the last 10 years. Sarah P. From Stop the Sweeps will talk about the campaign they've been having over the last year or so to stop the police from sweeping houseless villages and houseless people out of various areas. And just want to welcome everyone, let you know what the idea behind this was. I'm Tim with Northwest Alliance for Alternative Media and Education. We also work with Symbiosis PDX and the National Symbiosis Federation. You should check them out, really awesome federation of groups. And we came up with this idea for a series talking about various kinds of ways we can resist gentrification. I mean, initially this was conceived last year. We actually wrote a grant in the fall of last year before the whole coronavirus crisis and the economic crisis and social crisis started unfolding. So initially it was about fighting gentrification. Now it's about a whole lot more. So we wanted to, hit various topics of houseless rights, reclaiming land, tenants organizing, housing co-ops, and just bring some of that, that work to the forefront, because there's a lot of, lobbying and that kind of stuff, which a lot of groups do engage in, and social work, but we feel there's another niche there, and especially now with the unfolding crises, we really need to get on these other alternatives of how we can provide housing for people. And it's really kind of obscene the way the system is functioning right now, that we've got millions of vacant units and then millions and millions of more people facing houselessness. So we got to come up with ideas to combat that. And initially it was conceived as a 3-part in-person assembly, which we primarily focused here in Portland for Portlanders in particular neighborhoods to fight against the residential infill proposal, which was a thing passed by the city basically to make it easier to do infill, where old houses are bought up and then turned into and the lot is split and 2 expensive row houses are built in this place. It's particularly going to affect working class neighborhoods like Brentwood, Darlington, Montevilla, and Lentz. Since coronavirus happened, obviously the in-person assemblies are not really kind of in vogue right now. So we shifted more to an online format where we got some people who are more experienced nationally and locally to talk about strategies we can come up with. So, the in-person assembly, we'll try to do analogous as much as possible as online format will allow, but it has kind of shifted to be sort of speaker series with breakouts to discuss what we talked about and also discuss how we can work on these issues locally. So that's basically kind of the idea with the event series. There'll be 4 of them now, this month, next month, October, and then a Know Your Rights training for tenants in November with CLDC, the what's the name? Civil Liberties Defense Center will put one on. So yeah, online format for the whole thing. And we'll do a little agenda review. So we're gonna have Christopher with Lent Strong Housing do a land acknowledgement, just to make sure that we make sure the indigenous peoples of this land are honored and not pretend that we, what we do is as settlers is all the end all be all of what happens on this land. And then we'll have speakers in order of Max Rameau will talk, Sarah P will talk, and then Ibrahim will talk. That'll go on roughly an hour. And we have basically an hour for speakers, an hour, a little less than an hour for breakouts. and we'll let the speakers say what they need to say. So that can go into the breakout time if need be, so they can get what they need to say in. And I'll just go to Christopher now to give the land acknowledgement.
I'm going to read an acknowledgement of the land that was adapted from a draft by the PSU Native American Students and Communities Center. Today we honor the indigenous people whose traditional ancestral homelands we stand on, the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Watslala bands of the Chinook, the Tualatin, Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. It is important to acknowledge the ancestors of this place and to recognize that we're here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. We acknowledge the systemic policies of genocide, relocation, and assimilation that still impacts many Native American families today. In remembering these communities, we honor their legacy, their lives, their descendants, and their collective work in the struggle. Thank you.
Cool. Um, so I guess we'll just kind of move along in the agenda. The next person up would be Max Rameau to talk about Take Back the Land, kind of what happened 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever in Miami. Talk about what he's working on now, and also what he thinks about this moment and how we can start thinking about acquiring land for what the people need.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank the organizers here for inviting me, and for everyone who is participating, everyone who attended, for taking your time out on a Sunday to have this really important discussion. I was trying to get a slide deck presentation ready for today, and it's partially ready, but not fully ready because of just all the things that are going on, and I've just been unable to finish it. But I do have some points that I want to underscore, and in my time we'll try my best to do that. So as was mentioned, in 2007 in Miami, I was a part of an organizing collective that created what became known as Take Back the Land, and that was in Miami. And Take Back the Land became for um, best known for doing land takeovers and eviction defenses in Miami, and then also nationwide eventually as well. We did that, and then and currently I'm working with Pan African Community Action. Our website is pacapower.org, and we are working on community control issues, but want to focus most of the time here on what happened in 2008 and how that relates to what's happening now in 2020. So some of us can remember back in 2008, there was a foreclosure crisis, what we call the foreclosure crisis, that was happening in the United States, and it caused all kinds of havoc. There were, because of the way the economic system set up for mortgages to be made, and the way that they scored them and the way that they gave out the mortgages, then there was a complete collapse of the economic system in the United States, almost to the point of collapse, literally collapsing the U.S. Economy and the world economy along with it. And it only didn't because working people bailed out Wall Street and bailed out really the U.S. government, and we're still paying for that today. But the reason why that happened, and the reason why there was so much potential for that moment, was because there was this foreclosure crisis where people were getting foreclosed on. They were losing their jobs, and then because they were losing their jobs, they were unable to pay their mortgage or unable to pay their rent, and then those places that they were living in were foreclosed upon by the banks, and the banks were foreclosing on all kinds of houses, just really in record numbers. So as a result of this, we literally had in many cities noticeable numbers of vacant homes, and there were supposedly more vacant homes that had been foreclosed on, than there were people who didn't have places to live. And this was just jarring to the senses and a lot to see. And because it was happening at such a big scale, and frankly, because it was impacting people who it normally does not impact, it wasn't just impacting poor working class people, it was impacting those part members of the working class who were normally protected from this kind of thing, white middle class workers, etc. Then people were then forced to rethink, to reevaluate what we're doing here in this society with respect to land and with respect to housing. So what people saw in real time, because of all these foreclosures were going on, they saw that the system that they thought was supposed to be protecting them, because they've been paying these taxes into it, and because they believe in the system and they think the system is supposed to help them and benefit, they suddenly saw that this system was not doing anything for them. And in fact, to the extent that it was doing anything, it was not alleviating the crisis, it was exacerbating the crisis. They were giving bailouts to banks, and that just made it possible for banks to evict more people, and they were not helping out the people who were being evicted. So this was a really big issue, and that challenged then for large numbers of people in the United States the way that we thought about, or the way that we felt about land, and the way that we thought and felt about housing. This is a critically important point. During that time, around 2009 and 2010 and 2011, there was a poll that was conducted conducted for the past, or for several years, by Rasmussen, which is one of the big poll, one of the big organizations that does polls. They do them for ABC and CNN, etc. They did a poll each year, and they asked people, if someone is not able to pay their mortgage, should they be evicted from their house? And normally the answer to this would be, of course they should be evicted for that. They can't pay their mortgage. They can't pay that. They should be foreclosed on, evicted. Of course, this is not even a real question. But during this time, 2009, 2010, 2011, for several years in a row, because of the foreclosure crisis, a majority of people, over 50% of the people, said either that they do not think there should be an eviction, or they don't know if there should be an eviction. Not that they knew what should happen, not that they had some idea of what should happen on the other end, or they were clear about that or agreed on that, but they, for the first time, were starting to question whether or not someone who can't pay their rent or can't pay their mortgage should be evicted from the place. This created an incredible political opening for those of us who've been arguing that housing is a human right for all this time. This created an incredible political opening for us to move in that direction, not just in our rhetoric, but to move so with millions of people agreeing to this idea at the same time. And while we can all take radical action and put forth radical thought at any time, the ability for that radical action and radical thought to gain the following of a substantial chunk of the population really depends a lot on what's happening on the ground. And during most time, at least in the US, there's not enough happening on the ground that people would support this. But at that time, it was happening. So as a result, we, a group of us in Miami, would then built a movement that would focus on doing two things. One is eviction defenses to prevent people from getting evicted, and what we called land liberation, which was taking vacant government-owned and foreclosed homes, opening them up, and then moving people into them, and then of course doing eviction defenses after that. Again, there was a time where if we would have attempted to do this, the neighbors wouldn't even bother to call the police. They would have come themselves, and they would have kicked us out of the neighborhood, and they would have defended the vacant home, and they would have defended the right of homeowners or investors to keep these homes vacant because they wanted to make a profit, or they want to do something. But the exact opposite happened during this time. We were getting calls from neighborhoods who were saying, please come, we have a vacant home in our neighborhood, please fill it with a family, because we don't want it to just stay empty. We don't want it to just stay vacant. So people were changing their minds about the way they thought about fundamental parts of this society, including land and housing, particularly because of land and housing. And as a result, we were able then to build a movement whose was most visible strategy and tactic was eviction defenses and land liberation. This was a major move. Of course, that was what was most visible, but that's not what makes the movement most important. What can be most visible often are the strategies and tactics used, but history doesn't judge movements based on their strategies and tactics. They judge movements based on their objectives and the ability of that movement to achieve those objectives. So we were doing that. Take Back the Land was what became known as Take Back the Land. We would engage in eviction defense and land liberation as a means of winning two fundamental objectives. One was community control over land, the idea that land should be collectively controlled and democratized instead of owned by wealthy individuals or by corporations. That wealthy individual corporations can't just come in our community, buy up land because they have money and make decisions about what happens to that land. That communities should actually control the land. So community control over land was first. And the second was that we wanted to elevate housing to the level of the human right. So those were the two objectives that we had then, and we were able to get to those objectives again because the crisis, the foreclosure crisis, was so bad that people were starting to fundamentally rethink their relationship to land and their relationship to housing. So that was the big one. The other factor I think that played into our ability to build Take Back the Land at that point was this third factor. The big one was the big factor, of course, was that we had this crisis that changed the way people thought about things. But the second major component was that because of their actions, because of their response to this crisis, the general public was feeling that most people in the general public, and certainly people in the Black community, were feeling that the government and big business were not able to solve this problem for us. They felt that the government was not doing things to solve this problem, and that big business was not only unable to solve this problem, that the market was unable to solve this problem. Not only were they not able to do so, but they were actually benefiting from it. They were actually taking advantage of the crisis in order to build more wealth for themselves, and the government was just doing their bidding. Consequently, many of us concluded that we could not turn to the government for help. Where years ago, many people would have said, okay, now we need to protest the government and demand that the government do something. During this moment, people did not feel like the government was going to solve this problem for them. And during this moment, people did not feel like the market was going to solve this problem for them. Of course, many people believed that before, but now this was really taking root as an idea that, wait a minute, there's no one coming to save us. We are actually going to have to do this. And that's why we felt it was important that our demands then resulted in shifting power away from the government and shifting power away from capital, from business or wealthy individuals, and moving it over into the hands of working class Black communities so that we could solve our own problems. And that's where we moved with the ideas of housing as a human right and the collective control over land. So we're then able to do several eviction defenses and land liberations in Miami, and then we're able to build a national network of organizations that did the similar actions all around the country, including with Right to Survive over there in Portland. So those were some of the things that happened in 2008. In 2020, I think we are in an extremely similar position to do the same thing. The crisis that we're looking at now is not just one, but it's a combination of multiple crises happening at the same time. The coronavirus crisis, people are seeing that this is something that is big and something which could potentially devastate entire communities and could certainly harm them and their families. So they're really concerned about the way the coronavirus is going to play itself out, and are therefore rethinking their assumptions about certain parts of the economy or certain ways in which this society is organized, particularly around healthcare and particularly around the role of government in public health. That's one crisis. The other is most people can clearly see that there's an economic crisis looming over. Right now, while there is all kinds of unemployment happening because of the coronavirus and other reasons, and because there's all kinds of businesses shut down and some people are being forced to go to work, but they're not getting pay raises and others are removed from work altogether. All these things are happening, and yet the stock market continues to rise simultaneously. This makes no sense to anyone, and it seems pretty clear that we're going to find out in a few years that there was all kinds of things happening in the background that we are not seeing that was done just to float the stock market. What's happening in the stock market right now is completely fake, and people who recognize that think that a crash is coming. So that's one of the two of the crises that are happening. And then, of course, part of then the crash, which we think is coming, many people are recognizing that right now there's a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures that are happening in most states around the world, around the country. Although some states have already started to pull back on that. And so in many places, there hasn't been any evictions that have happened in the past few months, but though that is starting to come back. And of course, everyone knows that the eviction for moratorium is not permanent. And the eviction moratorium did not come with a rent or a mortgage freeze, which means that if your city or state goes, or county goes 6 months with a eviction moratorium without an accompanying rent forgiveness or mortgage forgiveness or mortgage moratorium, then that means that after 6 months and 1 day, the person who had not been paying their rent all this time because they have been out of work is going to owe 6 months worth of rent the next day. And if they don't have it the next day, then foreclosure proceedings are going to start against them, or eviction proceedings are going to start against them. So there is a coming eviction crisis. So the extent to which the economic crisis is horrible has been masked significantly by the fact that there has been a moratorium on evictions, and in many places a moratorium on turning off electricity and things like that. So this is a significant problem which is coming, and many people recognizing it. With the foreclosure crisis, even though it was clear for some that the foreclosure crisis was coming because of the way that the economic system was set up, many people were confused on this point and thought the prices were going to go up forever. No one thinks there's going to be anything but disaster once the eviction moratorium ends. Once it ends, there's no one thinks this is going to turn out well, or it's going to turn out, it's just going to have marginal impacts around the edges. This is going to be devastating when it happens. And we know that now, which means we can plan for it now. We don't have to wait until it happens in order to plan. When it does happen, we're going to see millions of people across the country, possibly in waves because of the way that states lift the moratorium, but millions of people across the country who are going to be evicted from their homes simply because they were not working during the moratorium, during the eviction moratorium. And we're going to face significant crisis. Also has, I think, however, has people thinking, well, if they could do a moratorium now, why can't they do a moratorium for longer, for a year or 5 years or 10 years or my entire lifetime? So I think people are also starting to question, in some small ways, question the way the system is set up, but they haven't been confronted with the crisis to be forced to deal with it in a real way. The crisis, like it or not, it won't be happening because I'm saying so, but the crisis is coming when we're going to see millions of evictions happening. And when we see those millions of evictions happening, people are again going to start to rethink their relationship to land and to housing. In addition, because of the economic situation, also because of the way that the role of government now in relation to big business, as well as the dumpster fire that is the Trump administration, people are going to see very quickly that the government is not able or not willing to help them during this crisis. And because the government is not able or not willing to help them during this crisis, that means that people are going to have to solve this problem for themselves. Communities are going to have to get together and solve this problem for ourselves. And organizers are going to have to network with each other across communities and try to help each other solve this problem for ourselves. So all of the elements are there. We have a significant crisis, and it's a crisis that people don't just look by and think that this could be, but it's something that they have to fight back on, because they can't just get kicked out of their homes. Getting kicked out of the home means they have nowhere to go, so they're willing to fight for their homes in a way that sometimes communities are not willing to fight for other individual gains or individual things. In addition to being willing to fight for them, they're recognizing the government is not going to be able to solve this problem for us, and the market is not going to be able to solve this problem for us. That means it is contingent upon forward-thinking organizations, forward-thinking organizers to get together and say, what new vision for the world can we put forth at this moment that people can gravitate towards to? What alternative world can we envision, and what alternative world can we create And what alternative world can we organize people to win? We're going to have to start thinking about those things today, so that when the next eviction wave starts to happen soon, in the next month or the next coming months, we are in a position to fight for some radical and significant changes. Not fighting for a homeowner's bill of rights, not fighting for debt forgiveness, but fighting for actual structural changes in the way that we think about land, and in the way that we think about housing, and the way those things work in this society. The opportunities for that are going to be just as big with the foreclosure, with the eviction crisis that is coming at the end of this eviction moratorium, as it was in 2008. And we need to be better prepared so that we can turn that that crisis into the end of these kind of crises by changing land relationships forever, by shifting power to communities through community control over land, and by ensuring the human right to housing. Recently, we've been working on some of those things with Pan-African Community Action, my organization in Washington, D.C., and hopefully we'll be able to talk more about that during the question and answer period. Thank you.
Very succinct, like 20 minutes exactly, basically. Yeah, we could get back to like more of the discussion, but that's great. Hopefully, yeah, we can bring that up more in the discussions, but we want to move on to make sure all the speakers get in. So I guess Sarah from Stop the Sweeps will be the next speaker up if they're ready to talk.
Hey there, it's Sarah from Stop the Sweeps. Thanks for having me. Thank you so much, Max. That was amazing, and like, yeah, like really touches to like all the issues right now that are going on, and a lot of the fears people are having who are housed with like the moratorium ending, which today like Kate Brown is supposed to say like whether or not she's extending the emergency state of emergency. So we're kind of waiting to see what happens. So yeah, like I'll just do like a quick intro of Stop the Sweeps and the People's Neighborhood Legal Collective, which is a part of the Stop the Sweeps. A little bit about our work, and kind of like a report back of what's going on in Portland. So Stop the Sweeps is a coalition that started about a year ago, that's made up of groups like Sisters of the Road, Right to Survive, Right to Dream, RAP, which is a Western Regional Advocacy Program, Glitter Squadron, which is a disability justice group, the National Lawyers Guilds, People's Neighborhood Legal Collective, People's Assembly, and the Trans Housing Coalition. I'm not sure if I'm forgetting anyone. I might be, I'm sorry if I am. So we've been working together for the past year. There's been like a lot of criminalization of houseless people just like existing like anywhere. Like we've had like, you know, a battle with Nick Fish with him criminalizing people in the parks, serving houseless people, and we're also working on a lot of like know your rights stuff, and like realize, and then like RAP is working on a newsletter challenging cities audits, following up with city halls to see like what's going on with the audit in a 10 citywide coalition. So a little bit about kind of the analysis around our work and our work. So the People's Neighborhood Legal Collective came out of Stop the Sweeps. Basically we realized and want to empower that, like, you know, just like a jailhouse worker, there's, you know, people doing legal work that like the farther away from like being recognized by the state because like you don't have a bar card, like it, like, you know, the less access to resources and access to like the state you have, so you're already living and building in abolition and doing this type of legal work. So like this is just like people like who are jailhouse workers, Black and brown people who experience like intense police brutality and state repression, disabled people advocating for their rights, trans people, houseless people. So we realized that like a lot of the organizing in Portland is around like lawyers and people who are like the state deems as legitimate legal workers, and it doesn't recognize the legal work that the people are doing. So, you know, we started the People's Neighborhood Legal Collective, and along with that analysis, we recognized that, like, you know, I'm also a part of the National Lawyers Guild, and a lot of our focus is on like protester support program where, you know, like when there's police brutality, we have a hotline set up and a rapid response network, so we can come and document that and do direct support. There's also groups in town that do anti-fascist organizing that also kind of just like leave out people that are houseless in this equation. So we wanted to, you know, like have a group that like, you know, includes houseless people because, you know, like they're, you know, at this intersection of experiencing these things. And a lot of Portland organizing just wasn't recognizing that. So we felt there was like a need. And on top of that, just like the need of like the fact that like sweeps are happening, and like sweeps have been happening throughout COVID despite what the government has been saying. You know, and there's just like empty hotel rooms. There's just been like constructive sweeps where like, you know, they'll do things to make house it like a situation like really uncomfortable for someone, like take away the bathroom or like the hand washing station. So like it would in effect take away their resources. So like they would have to leave, or just like outright sweeping people. So like we've been doing advocacy around that. And then you know, like we've been trying to like really emphasize a relationship between on the ground mutual aid, direct action, legal work, and other tactics, while centering like houseless voices, especially like people who are Black and brown, trans, and disabled. We started like the Stop the Sweeps hotline, which it's modeled after like the NLG protester support program, where but yeah, after I can, we have an Instagram and email, and we would love folks to get involved. So basically we have a hotline where we have folks, you know, like in a rapid response mode, just staffing the hotline, and we've put out flyers to folks who do outreach in various groups like P-Pop, the Free Lunch, Free Hot Soup, Free Lunch Collective, Rehab Sisters, Sisters of the Road. So many other groups have been like doing outreach and passing out the flyers that has like a COVID Know Your Rights with our hotline number. And then we have like a ground crew and a neutral sweep observer role where people would observe sweeps. And then we also like encourage neighbors to like become a sweep observer. And like if you see a sweep, get involved filming the police and be a good neighbor, you know, and like trying to change the dialogue on, you know, like these like other forms of policing that happen within, it's not just the cops that police houseless people. So like changing that dialogue and, you know, like including neighbors in a positive way, and things like that, just like growing that kind of dialogue and work. And then let's see, and also just the fact that like abolition isn't like a binary. It's not like one day we're, you know, in the state's clutches and the next like here we are in like this world of abolition, but we need to create it as we destroy the state and as we create systems outside of it. So like, you know, like all this work with the protesters and Black Lives Matter, like alongside of that, we need to be creating other systems that exist outside the state for people who can't access the state and the state's resources, and like as they should not, like because they're like racist and transphobic and people are like system adverse, and you know, like it's all a part of like the prison industrial complex, and like, you know, just an analysis that like a lot of people have like different intersections, like between housing and like you know, things that the virus is bringing up, and yeah, just a lot of things coming all at once. And like how Max was saying, like a lot of, you know, like things are just intensifying right now, and you know the sweeps are happening more even now because they've wanted to, like, you know, every time they're like, oh, phase 2 is coming along, phase 1 is coming, it just means like a further criminalization of people that don't have houses. So that's been a trend that we've seen here. And another project we've done is a know your rights scene. So like a lot of the laws, like if you don't own a house, like it's ridiculous. Like looking through the laws, like, you know, when we made this zine, like seeing like, you know, like certain things that, you know, if you're housed, you know, no problem, this is considered property. But if you're houseless, like, you know, your food is not considered property, your like building materials, or even your animals. So it's like, you know, or clothes that are considered dirty or something. Like, so it's like, you know, normally you can't just take property from someone, but if you're houseless, you can. And then like, you know, as we're facing so much state repression here in Portland because of the uprising, a lot of the protesters are houseless people on the front lines. Like Riot Ribs was a houseless and Black and Brown led group here in Portland that, you know, did face a lot of state repression. And, you know, like they're, so like, you know, like Portland people are getting door knocks and things like that. So like for if you're houseless, like there's even less protections because like, you know, the Fourth Amendment rights to search and seizure apply differently if you're living in a car. They apply differently if you're in a tent. So like it's just kind of like the rights that house people have in this state of increased state repression is even lessened for people just because they don't have houses, and that goes harder for people who are marginalized and already face increased state repression and criminalization. So it's just like a dangerous pairing. So that's kind of what we're thinking about and working on and things like that. And yeah, hope that makes sense. And yeah, that's all I got for now.
Cool. Oh, let's wait first. You want to say something? Okay. So yeah, if some people on this call aren't in Portland right now, but yeah, just to give a little context, you know, there's since the coronavirus started, there's been a huge explosion of like how people on the streets, camps popping up everywhere. There's also, you know, this political uprising, which is like, you know, getting crazier and crazier, like by the day, seemingly. I don't know if people have been following, but it's like turning into almost like armed combat. Now, like the right wing's getting involved and like causing problems. So yeah, to bring that kind of together, both those points of reclaim and like houseless support, we have like Ibrahim, who like kind of the story is that like his group, Right to Survive, was inspired by some of the work they saw with Take Back the Land, and they decided they would start doing it out here. They were, you know, reclaiming some houses. They were doing some houseless, like autonomous houseless village organizing. And Ibo just talked about his experience and like what inspired him to like do this work, and you know what some of his work is.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Ibrahim Mubarak. You want to know what inspired me to do the work I did? They wouldn't leave me the fuck alone. They wouldn't let me sleep. So it was 7 of us really that started Tent City, which turned out to be tiny house villages, and it was called Dignity Village. And we wanted to show this country that people can get along and live as neighbors and share the same space. So it was me, the Muslim, black of course, and then there was Jack Tafari. He was a white roster with long blonde dreadlocks, and it was Jada May. She was white Indian, and Tim Brown, he was a black Christian, and JP, he was the Antichrist. We didn't know what he was, but now he embraced Islam, and he's going full force as a Muslim. And we called our first campaign out of the doorways, because here in Portland, it rained a lot and people would sleep in doorways because they had that covering, but then people would kick them out the doorway. So we said they won't let us sleep in doorways, so we get out of the doorways and build a community organized uh, uh, tent village. And so they didn't want us to do that. They kept moving us around and moving us around until we finally got, I think we had over 260 people. And with our supporters and other activists, we stood on 17th and Northeast Savior, and we stood our ground, and they had no choice but to give us land, and they sent us out to 33rd Northeast Sutherland. That's where Dignity Village at now, and it's been there for about 22 years, and it's still operational. After that, I'm gonna jump up and down because I want to get back to how Max inspired us to do Fall After His Sleep. But after that, I left after 7 years and went back in the street because people were saying, Ibrahim, it's more houseless people on the street. They're getting harassed. They can't sleep. They're getting charged with trespassing and, you know, and all that nuisance shit when you don't live in a house or an apartment. And so I went back in the street and I went through almost everything that a houseless person would go through. I went to jail. I got criminalized for existing in open space. I had my daughter taken away from me because we were living outside. I got drug cases. They wouldn't allow me to work here in this city, in this state. And at one time, I was on city arrest when 911 came because I embraced Islam. And so I had to stay in a certain geographical area and couldn't leave that area. And all the houseless people would bring me food and water. And this one lady came, I'm never gonna forget that. She said, even bad guys deserve to eat. And I said, well, take it to the president then. And so after that, I got back with some of the people that helped me with Dignity Village. And one of her name was Trillium Shannon. And we started a group. They wanted to name it something else, but we come to the conclusion that everybody have a right to survive. So we named it Right to Survive. And we started doing activist work on educating the houseless people to defend for themselves, to stand up for themselves, and to help other houseless people. And lo and behold, that I know being a houseless advocate is just not helping houseless people. I mean, to stay on the street, you have to help them to stop people from criminalizing them. You have to stop people from torturing them, tormenting them. You have to stop people, you know, the government from outcasting them. I mean, this social space facing is nothing new to us. People stayed away from us as much as possible. So now we the educator, we educating them. How you like us now? Mofos, you know? So it's taken a complete turn where people is calling me daily saying, I'm going to become houseless. What do I do? I tell them to go to their mayor. I mean, even he got maced in the face one time trying to be an activist. So we started branching off and doing several things, you know, like housing rights, educating people about their housing rights, educating people about their civil rights, their constitutional rights, and their human rights. And that was our main focus, because if you know your constitutional, human, and civil rights, you can't be defeated, because they must, nobody's above the law, and they must abide by those rules because they made those rules up. So you playing their game. However, now I'm gonna revert back to how we came up with Reclaim, an organization that's a takeoff from Max Rameau, Take Back the Land. Max came to Dignity Village when we was just getting started, and he found a tent city called, I can't get it right, Max, so correct me later on. Umpqua? Is it Umpqua?
Umoja
I think
Village.
so. It's called Umpqua. And
Umoja.
so, Mojo, yeah, Mojo. And so the police burnt it down because they didn't want people gathering together and showing that, hey, you ain't got to pay those property taxes and buy those big expensive houses, anything. You can live inexpensively and be minimalist. And so Max said, well, they don't want us to live in tents, so we'll liberate people as houses. And so he came up with a unique way of getting people into housing. And I don't know if I should tell all the secrets, the ins and outs. No, I will. Ain't nothing on here but us. And so we read Mac's book, and we contacted him, and we became a part of Take Back the Land. But we called our chapter Reclaim, that we reclaiming these houses back that the government and the realtors was tricking us out of. And so we would go look on the MLS, multiple listing system, for housing, and we was attacking the banks on pre-foreclosed houses, which was moving people out their house and cheating them out their hard-earned money for buying these houses. And so we would go and bid on them, knowing damn well we ain't had no money. And so then we wouldn't pay them. They had to start all over. So we would scope a house out for about a month. And then after we bid on it, we would break in the back door, change the locks at night, and then find houseless people that was willing to take that chance to move in these houses. And then we'd get a U-Haul and move like on 1 o'clock on a Saturday evening. You know, how you doing? People think it was legit. And this was going good. This campaign was going good. But we ran into a bit of a problem where we had to come up with some strict rules that, we didn't want it to turn into a party house. I mean, we're not trying to dictate on how you should live, what you should do, but we didn't want, the green light special, women of the night, drug dealing, gangland fighting, and, having 8 cars parked in your front yard. We wanted to be, kind of out of sight as much as possible because it wasn't our house. But then we figured out we lived there for a month and we was getting mail. Then they couldn't just kick us out. We had to go through the same procedures of going through eviction court. And so the bank started giving us, let me see, was it a grand a week? So they were giving us $4,000 to get out. And if it took us 3 weeks, they'd give us $3,000. And if it was 2 weeks, each week we wasn't there. So we was gonna break the bank. So we was breaking in we was liberating all kinds of houses at that time. And we ran into a slight problem when they was liberating the houses. We was letting, almost anybody but everybody in because we believe everybody should have proper shelter. They start, some of the people start taking the plumbing. And so, and so they come up with these new laws that was convicting people for vandalizing houses instead of living in them, taking the plumbing. And so that kind of like shut us down for a minute. To my knowledge, I think we still have about 3 houses that's still operating, and they so low key. I was in the house on 68th and Powell, And I felt like I was on Andy Griffin of Mayberry when they came over. We cut the grass, we painted the house, we kept it good. They came over and brought us cake and juice and wanted us to join the neighborhood association. And so we kind of like shunned from them because we didn't want to give our hand, let them know what we was doing. But then the bank came around, put notice on us. And so with that, I think it's more than one way to help houseless people. If you can get them to understand that they still, because they're houseless, they still have to obey some laws of the land. And vandalizing the house, you're not hurting yourself, but you're hurting the whole campaign like it did our group in Reclaim. And so after that, Right to Survive came up with Right to Dream 2, a rest area. And so that's when the city was trying to figure out how they could find us because they couldn't move us off that land. It was private land. And so they were trying to find the owner. And so they were finding us under the wrong coding of a rest area. A rest area to the city, and they fucked up way of thinking is when you driving from state to state or city to city and you pull over and you take a little rest in your car. But to us, we terminated that as a place where people go to rest and sleep and not be disturbed by nobody. Because the first thing the houseless person looks for is a good place to sleep, then eat, then work, and then shower, come on, you're going down the line. But you can't do nothing when you sleep deprived. And by the city, sleep depriving houseless people is torture, and that's an act of war when they sleep deprived. And so we looked at that the city was claiming war on houseless people. So we start educating them on their rights and letting them know what the police can do and couldn't do. And a lot of houseless people start standing up for their rights. And we start having these kick-ass protesters, marches, or rebellion, or demonstration, as Paul Bowden was saying in San Francisco. And that's when a lot of people took notice of us and saying, those houseless people standing up for their rights, we should join them, we must join them, we should help them out. And that's how things exploded until now. Like these protesters now, I love that shit. I love that shit. So I can't be with y'all. I was going back and forth to Chicago. Most of you know my mother also tastes for eating. She hasn't eaten in like 10 months. She's about 50 pounds. So we finally got her to go to the hospital. And so I'm back, in Portland now. Still concerned what's happening to my mom, but my mind is not so focused on that. I'm back here where I can do work and continue this great campaign of liberating houses and helping people stand up for their rights. Thank you. It's hard talking with this thing all day.
Maybe the host knows. Great. Awesome examples of housing resistance. I'll say like a short piece about one, I want to cover something I forgot at the beginning, but we want to acknowledge the partners that made this possible. We had some funding for a grant, but just to get this in here, we want to thank Southeast Uplift and Civic Life East Portland Community Office, the Spark Plug Foundation, and the Peace Development de Colores. And we just want to make that acknowledgement, get that in there. Also, I say, so my personal motivation right now is I think we're at like a critical time right now with at least here in Portland, the eviction moratorium will end supposedly September 30th, which means we might be right on the cusp of the crisis that Max is talking about, and we really need to be getting ready right now. And I think especially with like the kind of political instability we're seeing right now, is that we have a chance to push a lot of this stuff forward that we've been talking about for a long time. And it's kind of like almost seems like it's like now or never, you know? And I think an important part of this is that like kind of the rules that have been governing society for the last few decades are kind of like, you know, falling apart in certain ways, in a lot of ways. And it's like up to us to start pushing what we really want to have happen. And I think kind of like the tactics that Max and like Eve with Reclaim were using 10 years ago, maybe even more relevant now. If we start saying, hey, we want like free land for poor people, because that's just like, this isn't working. The system clearly isn't working right now. And now that we have kind of like this mass of people who like really just don't believe in the system anymore, we need to be like articulating this, like working together and like making clear demands of like using this moment to push forward our agenda. Because that's what we see with the right and the powerful is like they see a crisis happening, they got their whole thing ready. So we got to be like getting our plans together right now. And yeah, just want to say that piece. And the next part is breakouts. We have about 50 minutes. They don't have to be breakouts. We're right on the cusp of like, we could have a full discussion with like the whole group of people, or we could have breakouts. We had 2 suggestions of talking about, one great breakout group would talk about discuss strategies for reclaiming property, reclaiming land, taking control of land. And the other would be how to support houseless communities, kind of vague. We also like could, if someone really has something they want to talk about, open that up to another breakout group, or we could just have one big discussion. And I think first, I'll just ask if we want to stay in one big group and discuss things, and we'll take a stack. We're at 22 people right now, which is probably doable. So the way I'll do it is I'll just say, if people can raise their hand, then we can like kind of take a straw poll of who would prefer to stay in a big group or who would prefer to get in breakout groups. So I'll say, everyone get ready. Who wants to stay in a big group, raise your hand. Where does it show it? Okay. Who would want to do breakout groups? We got a few people in the room here who also raised their hand saying they want to do a big discussion. Does anyone really want to do small breakout groups? Raise your hand. We got, yeah, we got one each. So one who really wants to be in a small group, one who really, a few people who said we'd rather be in a big group. So Fiona doesn't say, says they don't see the raise hand button. What does Fiona want to do? Okay. Okay. I think we only had one person who said they really want a small breakout group. So I think we're going to go with a larger discussion, and we can take stack. The easiest way, I think, to keep track is that if you want to talk, write stack in the chat. And do we have, what were the couple questions we want to ask Joanne?
We wanted to ask, what does homelessness look like in your neighborhood, and how has that changed during the coronavirus?
Okay, so we did have one question that we like to insert in here. Yeah, Ali, write stack in the chat. So what does houselessness look like in your neighborhood, especially since coronavirus? And what was the rest?
The other one was, what tactics or strategies we learned that might work.
Okay, well, so let's start with like discussion of what does houseless look like in your neighborhood since coronavirus, and what can we do to support our houseless neighbors? And do we have, anyone want to say anything? Or Where did Ibrahim go? Oh. Well, okay. Well, Ibrahim, what do you think we can do to support our houseless neighbors in this time? You want to go?
What do I think that we can do to support houseless neighbors?
Yeah, in Portland today.
I think we can come together as one to get this social distance. I mean, that's something to keep us integrated again, separate again, where we don't know about people and we think that we get that stigma that all houseless people are drug addicts, prostitutes, low life, don't need to be. And so we need, as houseless people, to show that we're human. And that's what this whole thing is about, is humanitarian, that a lot of people don't treat us as being human. So if we treat them as being human and then show them that, you know, we seen that, who is that, Mr. Roger, hello, aren't you glad to be my neighbor song to him, and keep our places clean and not trash, and we clean up behind ourselves and we start protesting. That's what I love. We start protesting, saying, we need porta potty. We need a place to shower. We need a place to throw our trash. We need a place to eat. We need a place where we can still stay with our children. Just because we live on the street don't fucking mean we bad parents. It's just we're in a bad situation. So why would they take your children and make you jump through unattainable hoops? So we need to start speaking up and address these unjust laws that's attacking houseless people, and get people that live in houses to become, you know, partners with us and open up their eyes, because as they seeing now, a lot of them becoming houseless.
We actually did have a question for Max. Do you want to just read it? I can't. Adam?
Sure. The question is, you don't need me on the video. You don't need me on the video. How can folks understand and make the link or connection between economic, environmental justice, and climate justice? Max, what's your insight?
So thank you for the question, and thank you for thinking about this. So I think there's two levels on which we have to do things like this. The first is that we have to study the issue or the problem or the solution. So we actually need to be deliberate about having study groups, workshops, Zoom meetings, where we explicitly discuss what's the connection and link between these things, and we all develop a deeper understanding of the issues at stake. And this, of course, can happen on this level and should happen on this level. It can also happen on a deeper level, which is to say that people engage in this kind of study while a member of an organization that exercises organizational discipline. So we have to come to some conclusion that we all can live with. We have to have some level of consensus. Doesn't have to be 100% consensus. We have to have some level of high level of agreement about the conclusion. And we either conclude that these things are not connected, that the issues of economic justice, environmental justice, and climate justice are not connected, or we conclude that they are connected, and then we have to demonstrate that connection in our work. So first we have to among us who are conscious and who want to organize and who are thinking about how to organize and thinking about the future, we have to engage in study groups and in meetings just like this one, where we discuss this exact thing. So that's first. Then the second level then is that we have to take the information that we get from the study that we do from a 2-hour Zoom meeting, and we have to then be able to distill that information into little bits that the general public can consume. And that means we have to create little memes you know, that talk about, or you have some clever way of showing the connection between these issues. We have to do little short video clips, 5-minute video clips that talk about or demonstrate in the way in which these issues, economic justice and environmental justice, are related. We have to be able to, and of course, racial and gender justice, we have to be able to then transmit the same information that it takes us 4 hours, 8 hours, 2 hours to get, and we have to then do create these series of shortened versions that we can then share with the general public. So I think those are 2 levels, but I think some of the most important work we can be doing right now is political education, because we do not have, as a movement, we don't have enough agreement on what the problem is, on what the analysis of the problem is, or what the solution is. I think this tackling questions like that, and like the ones that we're tackling today, is exactly the way we're supposed to then develop higher levels of unity around those questions.
So whoa, sorry there.
Don't press go.
So was Allie on Stack? I saw like Allie saying right Stack before. Was that to get on Stack to ask a question?
I was just clarifying, but let's see. I guess I could ask a question. So yeah, in terms of I'll go on video. Political education. Me and a few other folks are thinking about that right now with our community. I live in Irvington and grew up in Irvington, so pretty wealthy property owning neighborhood, and like thinking about how to talk to liberals about like different conceptions of property, and kind of like, yeah, working on like using this political moment to shift some of those ideas. And so my question, I guess, is just it's a pretty open-ended one, but just like, I don't know, how do we do that? And so, yeah, that obviously doesn't have like one answer, but just like moving forward with that, I guess, like I know like being aware of what houseless people's voices are, and that is really important. And yeah, so just like the how, like what ideas and how can we all work together and I would love to like stay plugged into this group of people and doing that, because y'all have so much experience, and I'm coming from a place of like, you know, some reading and whatever, some experience, but not no expertise, and no, like I haven't done this before.
Okay, could you restate the question again?
I guess like how, I mean, I think it's an ongoing longer term question, but just like, yeah, how can we stay plugged in? I'd love to stay plugged into this group of people and your ideas, and like all work together through that. But just like, how do we continue to stay plugged in together through developing these political education ideas, and like how do we agree on what those ideas are, and what is the best ways to like get them out there?
On our part, I'll say we keep coming to these, next month's one and October's one. We're definitely like keeping track of all the people who like sign up. There's over like 25 people at this one, and we'll definitely like, create a list of people. Our intention is to like maybe next year, whenever, start like some sort of group that is working on these kind of more radical housing solutions. We'll let everyone, know their next steps once we get through with like this particular educational series. But also we want to make people plug into the groups that are part of these talks. Like if you hear what Right to Survive is talking about and think it's cool, or Stop the Sweeps, or PTU will be up next month. Definitely like we're hoping to like get people to join those groups, as well as like, a way to strengthen the housing movement and coordinate stuff, better together. There's a lot of people doing housing stuff, but we want to bring it more into focus, and like kind of more of a shared agenda, perhaps, it's kind of the goal. Cool.
So can I say something real quick about the study groups?
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you so much for just being interested in that. I do think this is the most important work we can and should be doing right now. There is no magic to the study group, and really, I would say the study group, talking about as one part, but what we really should all be doing is joining an organization. Join an organization, or if there's none that is doing the things that you want to do, then create the organization that you want to see. And once you're in an organization, then you have responsibilities to that organization. One of those responsibilities should be engaging in a study group. And that means that the group of people who are doing work together, who are organized together, then have to get together and say, this is what we want to accomplish. How do we do that? And then they have to think about what are the different parts and elements, and then study those things. And if you think about other areas of life, if you go and watch a basketball team or football team, they spend weeks getting together, working together, and studying a playbook, the playbook of opponents, things like that, because they all want to have the same goal and they want to achieve the same goal. And the only way that and then they want to have the same strategies and tactics in order to achieve the same goal. And the way they do that is that they practice at it constantly. And no one would go to a sporting event, would pay to go see a football team or a basketball team if they didn't get together and practice first. If they were just out there and anyone was doing whatever it is that they want, that wouldn't be entertaining or interesting to watch. Football and basketball are not more difficult than organizing, are not more difficult than changing this society. So if they are getting together and every day they're studying and every day they're practicing together, then we have to be able to do the same thing. Specifically in terms of study group, in terms of your study group, you should identify the areas that you want to look at, and then identify some readings. First start with some short readings and then go with some books. And then when you read a book, don't read the whole thing, do a short, a chapter or 2 chapters, a shorter version of it. And when you're having the discussion, you should have questions that bring out disagreement. You don't want to just talk about the things you agree on. You want to focus on the things that you disagree on and try to work through them with intellectual honesty. If someone is making a good point, don't just keep your point. You're not, you can't do this in public and with, people who you don't know and trust. When someone makes a good point, you have to be able to concede your position and say, this was a good point, and change your mind. And they have to be able to do the same thing. And that's how you all get on the same page in terms of what you're doing, the way you're thinking about a phenomenon, and then how you want to approach that phenomenon. And then when you talk to others about it, you're doing the same thing, except you're doing it in a little bit simpler format. You're not necessarily requiring them to read in advance, but you're having engaged conversations. You're listening to what they're saying. You're conceding a point when they make it, but you're also pushing back on the points that they make that don't make any sense. Last point here is that when you're having these discussions, I know that there's a tendency, particularly among us, to want to be supportive of each other and what we're saying. I'm urging you, do not be liberal about radical ideas. If one person says, I think we should turn left, and the next person said, I think we should turn right, you cannot then say, I agree with both of you. I agree with what everyone says. You have to say, why do you want to turn left? Why do you think it's important to turn right? You have to challenge each other so that you can actually uncover what the disagreements are and then get down to the bottom of what you actually think, not just some random thought passing by or because this sounds good. There has to be a difficult process of challenging and mastering and struggling with the material. And then when people have a high enough level of agreement on it, then that's when you'll know you're ready to have a real organization to launch.
Cool. Oh, we got 2 people on stack, Fiona Burgess and then AG. Fiona, you want to go?
Sure. Excuse me. So my org right now, something that I'm helping facilitate a bit, well, something that I'm on the team for is going back to kind of the political education point earlier, something we're kind of doing right now. The original plan, I think, was to just distribute zines of our making to distribute at protests so that, liberals attending the protests and getting the safety gear that we were also handing out would also get kind of a dose of political education so that they could further contextualize the reason behind why they're doing this, and also, potentially be motivated to join an organization. And now that I've been sitting through this, I'm realizing that housing is kind of a big there's kind of a big gap in our list of like priority topics, and housing is one of those topics. And it kind of goes back to what someone was saying earlier. I've already forgotten her name, but or their pronouns. But I guess this, going back to what to say, like what we're trying to do is to find a way to consolidate these topics to sort of an entry level understanding that is not that does not compromise any of our particular values. And I'm wondering what that might look like for housing issues, particularly like locally, I guess, but maybe more in general here. We might have to change our distribution plans as like less and less liberals attend these protests. But
What group was that you're?
Portland DSA.
Portland DSA. Okay, cool. And I guess AG, if you want to talk.
Yeah, I'm just curious the thought of an organization such as Central City Concern, which has the largest portfolio of property in the entire Portland metro region, and the barriers that they present to people in getting housing. So the idea that you have to be clean and sober before you can be admitted into housing. These types of ideas kind of lodged into social service systems that prevent people from getting services. I'm just curious, like, what your ideas are in terms of kind of combating that, because they hold the lion's share of the resources.
I mean, maybe that's a question for Sarah or Ibrahim, like if they have, I don't know if Ibrahim even heard that, but Sarah, do you have anything to?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's why community organizing is so important. Like Max was saying, creating systems outside of that, because so many of these systems already are inaccessible for people. Like the prison industrial complex spans beyond prisons. Like it's within hospitals, it's within services. Like, you know, like who can access a space isn't just down to, like, a lot of my perspective comes from disability justice because I'm an amputee and disabled. So like I have that perspective of, like, you know, like the prison industrial complex, you know, like spanning to these other spaces and needing to create other spaces because people, like, you know, like Black and brown friends of mine, like can't go to hospitals sometimes because it's worse for them than not, you know, and like, so people already are creating these systems outside of that. And I think like organizing is key to that. And like, you know, the state like isn't, you know, like the only legitimate thing out there. And like, I think like, you know, the closer the access you have to it, like I was saying earlier, like the lawyers like that have a bar card, like they also get more privilege from that. Like they get money, and they actually are like gatekeepers and exploiters to the system. Like, you know, they can say they're radical all they want, but like at the end of the day, they still make money from this, you know, and like other legal workers farther removed don't make money from this. And it's not for that type of work. Like I would love to, like, going back to like that whole liberal question, like I would love to see like people stop this like kind of sign waving thing, like at that level of like, you know, the lawyers and people who directly benefit from systems who like play this line where like they're both in it and out of it, kind of like whatever suits them, but like ultimately like they're still doing the state's narrative, like they're still responding to what the state says they have to do in court instead of taking direct action, because like they have all the stuff and it's not affecting them yet. Like, and I've always seen like the most affected people rise up and help each other. That's just always the case. And like I would love to see people who like it hasn't hit yet, like be like, oh, like the status quo I have, like I got this because I benefit from this fucked up system, and like let me like redistribute that, let me like do reparations, let me like just use my positionality to disrupt the system in a real way instead of like sign waving and whatever. Like I think it would be great to see that kind of change, but like I don't know what it'll take for that to happen, but that's just a dream of mine for sure.
I hear you. I guess I'm just thinking, like, what are we doing to actually, I don't see anybody like talking about Central City Concern having way too much real estate in Portland and not providing accurate, or I mean, they're centrally located. They have access. They're so accessible to the people that they choose to serve, and that's problematic, because then that makes it, you know, that creates a lot of difficulty for all these other small organizations that have to kind of pick things up here and there all over do you understand what I'm saying? Like, it's frustrating that these organizations are not being confronted at all by their ethics. And I hear that it's great to create these outside organizations, but we also have to do something about like the resources that they hold.
Oh, 100%. I would love to see like a strike from people inside of those places, like be like, oh, we're not going to be mandatory reporters anymore, or like we're not going to work with the police anymore, and like literally like start like dismantling those things. Like I think that's like a great thing to organize around for sure. I would love to see that. I don't think it has been though.
Sweet. So I have a question for Max. One, like, well, maybe two-part. Like, obviously, what do you see the possibilities for a similar movement that was happening in 2008, 2009, 2007, whatever it was, happening now, and how can we actually go about bringing something like that about, like not just locally, but like nationally? Are there groups that are kind of trying to bring this stuff together?
So I think a repeat in a way, obviously it's not going to be exact, but a repeat in a way of what happened in 2008 with a crisis of people getting evicted and they're building and social movements jumping up around that is inevitable. And it's not because we do anything about it. Now there is a role we can play, but that's because capitalism is going to do what capitalism does, and it's good. Capitalism is going to create this crisis, and people are going to respond to the crisis. And because there's some level of organization in the society, then that's the level of response that's going to exist naturally. So with that said, I think our role then. It's going to happen when the moratoriums end, when the eviction moratoriums end, if they are not accompanied with a forgiveness of debt, with the forgiveness of all the back rent, then there will be a mass wave of evictions, and there will be a mass wave of some sort of response from the bottom up. Our question is, what are we doing to shape that response? So we're not going to bring about the response to 2000 that happened in 2008, because we're not going to take away housing from people. People then were responding for 2008. The system took away housing from people in 2008. It's going to do so in 2020 or 2021, whenever it happens, and people are going to respond to that. What we can do, however, is shape the way in which people respond. And quite frankly, the way that we responded as a movement in 2008 and 2009, et cetera, was not good. I mean, there were a few groups that of course, tried to push the line with the human right to housing and with community control over land. But there were a lot of organizations that did terrible work. And they were pushing for a homeowners' bill of rights, which didn't address at all what was happening to renters. And it turns out most people that were getting evicted were renters. The people were looking at solutions that had to do with getting homeownership again, when homeownership in the first was what was causing the problem. The system of individual homeownership was the thing that led to these cycles that caused this big build up and then cause the crash. So I think the thing that we can do is we can envision a new future, a new world, a different world, and then we have to organize towards that. We have to be out of the box right now, thinking about what we're going to say when this mass wave of evictions comes, what we're going to say we should do in response, and what kind of demands we should have, and then what kind of objectives we should have that are not demands. What kind of things should we be trying to do ourselves? We have to say that first, and we have to say that loudly, and then we have to organize towards it to show what it looks like. We have to operationalize it so people can see it and then copy that. And the problem that we had last time during 2008 is that people were very quick to organize and operationalize individual homeownership, which meant that it had several impacts. First of all, that when you're fighting for a homeowner's bill of rights or getting the homeowner the right to stay in the house or get them a new mortgage. It means that the only ones who benefit from that are people who were homeowners before the crisis hit. So the people were so privileged that they were able to be homeowners. And for those organizations that were doing work, for example, in the Black community, there's never been more than 49% of Black people living in a house that they or their family members owned. There's never been more than 49% Black home ownership. And as a result, then, no matter how much work you did, even if you helped all the homeowners, you would never help the majority of Black people. And the ones that you help will be disproportionately wealthy. So I think that this was some of the problem. We have to come out with a radical analysis and then a radical solution to the problem, in addition to the radical strategies and tactics that we did employ last time. And the radical strategy and tactics and liberal or weak demands or objectives is not a good combination. It just means we are risking our freedom and risking our lives for some whack demands that aren't going to get us anywhere anyhow. We need to come out with a new vision that centers community control, democratizing land, and that is designed to realize the human right to housing for every single human being. That's what we should be thinking about right now, and thinking about how to operationalize in the next couple of months. On the last part, there are several organizations who are working on this now. Major movements happening in Philadelphia, a few things happening in Washington, D.C., although they haven't kicked off yet. There's a few things that they're trying to plan in Miami, but Miami has been defunded in terms of a lot of the social justice work. There are organizations around the country thinking about this and trying to do it and thinking about how to respond to it when it happens, when the evictions start to happen. We need to start putting these groups together. We haven't done that yet. I don't know anyone who's doing that yet, and we need to get that happening right away.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll just say, like, I feel like we have the potential to be in a revolutionary moment. And I think every revolution you've seen throughout history, like, one of the main demands is redistribution of land. And in fact, you think of, like, Russia, you think of Mexico. I mean, I think we should be thinking about free land for poor people. I mean, that's essentially what a lot of revolutions in the past have talked about. And it sounds absurd in, like, neoliberal America, like, free land, that's impossible. But, like, really, America is built on free land, one from, like, genocide and, like, slavery, but also even more recent examples, like the land donation claim, like, they gave land to settlers. Like, you work it, you get land for free. That's how they built the American West. And after World War II, you had, if you served in the war, you got either a free college education or a free house. So it's like, we need to be, like, making sure that, like, this is not crazy. This is stuff that we need to be, like, pushing forward right now. And that's to say that my piece on that. Anyone else have, like, questions? I guess we kind of turn more like a Q&A. Kind of difficult to do, like, the assembly format online. So I guess we'll just kind of, like, continue to ask questions from the audience to the speakers, or amongst each other if they want to talk about certain things. Does anyone have a question for Max, Eve, or Sarah? Oh, we got someone in the crowd. If you want to, like, speak into the, just so everyone can hear that.
I'm going to try not to ramble. I have trouble staying on point. And yet, that idea of, I don't know, I spent 16 years in Alaska, and even in Alaska, they have these government-sponsored programs involving, land that is, it's homesteading, land that's given to people who are willing to develop that land or maintain the land. And I don't understand why that couldn't be applied to urban areas that have fallen into disrepair, that some sort of program, whether it's grassroots or government sponsored, allows the reclamation of land that's been abandoned, houses that have been abandoned, even if they're privately owned, to people who don't have ownership, if there's an agreement that they could improve the structure, take responsibility for the structure, maintain the structure in exchange for ownership. I mean, I never thought of that on my own, and yet as unjust as that principle was to indigenous peoples in America, to change that concept and reapply that concept to the inner city, it seems to complement much of what
Ibrahim, I think, was trying to say in terms of allowing people to have shelter insofar as they maintain that shelter and add to it instead of taking away from it, or even keep it up. I don't know. That was an idea that I had. I don't know what you think of that. Does that make any sense? So the question is, how would that be implemented? If how could that idea be implemented either on the grassroots level or on a government-sponsored level?
So I think a couple things. First of all, I agree with you generally. I don't agree that it should be individual. It should be individual. Should refer to individual home ownership. It should be reverted to use as long as you can use it, and even then use to your children afterwards. But that's different than individual ownership. So that's the only part that I would disagree with. I don't mean to sound snarky with this response, but the reason why it's not happening is because no one ever got rich by giving away free land. Like, the land is really valuable, and there's lots of people there, as opposed to in Alaska, even though it can be valuable, there's not lots of people there, and they actually need to populate it more in order to extract the value from it. So as long as there's capitalism, then you can't do that unless there's some kind of particular crisis where you need to populate the area. As long as there's capitalism, then you're not going to be able to implement that, particularly in cities that people actually want to go to. So what we change is the economic system that says the purpose of land is to pull profit from it, as opposed to the purpose of land is to serve humanity. And if it was, and really other animals as well, not just humanity. But if it was, if that was the purpose, then this would be what you're describing would be the only way to do it. We wouldn't be able to understand how you could do it another way, because that's the purpose of land. But we can't understand it how it can't do it, because the purpose of land right now is to make a profit. And that's what we need to change. And movements change that, not governments, and certainly not businesses.
I'm trying to think of, like, getting from here to there. You know, even as a stopgap, what if there could be like debt? I don't really want to use the word forgiveness, but debt removal. If someone's living in a structure that's not being used, and they're maintaining that structure even minimally, in exchange for just being there until whatever else happens in the future involving the owners. Something to get people off the streets in the interim before these larger changes to the system could take place. Like, I don't think anyone who's in franchise wants to talk about any of these ideas, let alone implement them, because as soon as you have a group of people that is no longer dependent upon this neo-feudalistic wage slave, like, money vacuum by way of, like, temporary real estate. I mean, if you have people who could just live in a house without worrying about rent, everyone would say, well, why can't we do that? And it would jeopardize the whole system. So even getting something like this started is going to jeopardize the whole system in theory. It's going to start opening up minds. But how do you get it started?
Yep, building a movement that's strong enough to make it happen is how we get it started. So that's really what it's going to take, and it will be just as challenging as building a movement to say that Black people can ride where they want on the bus, when the majority of people are benefiting from them not riding where they want on the bus. All right, I know we had a couple other people on stack.
Labor-based exchange, like giving someone land and as long as they maintain it, is exclusive to people with disabilities.
Yeah, exactly right. Great point, Fiona.
Cool. Eve had to step out. His mom gave him a call, so he's no longer available to answer questions. But I just want to see this. Sarah, is there anything you want to say, like, before we got like 12 minutes left in the time allotment? Anything you haven't wanted to say that you'd like to say?
I can't think of anything right now. But thank you. I'm just just really grateful to be a part of this, and for Max and Ibrahim's work and everyone's work in the community.
Cool. So we do have XY on stack.
Hey, this is I am wondering, and I don't even know with just security if this is something that we would want to discuss on this call, but so I live in Northwest Portland, and there's just so many empty condos and apartment buildings, and just was really like inspired by news of, I think in Minnesota, of them like, and of people like taking over a hotel and stuff like that. But I don't know if yeah, that's like where Portland is at with any of those direct actions. And if so, how like I could support that. But yeah, once again, I don't know if it's security wise, if you want to talk about it.
Maybe we could have like another meeting for people.
Well, I think that's kind of like up to us. I guess, you know, Portland isn't that place right now, but like, I mean, even the Minneapolis thing, I heard about it, but it really like, it has been shut down from what I heard. That hotel they had taken over, and it was because of, as usual, like someone had like a drug, someone who was staying there had a drug incident, and then like the hotel owner was like, okay, that's enough, we can't have this anymore. And a lot of it, I think, was, you know, they saw that the rebellion had happened, and like, you know, things were being pushed very far in Minneapolis for, you know, maybe a few weeks. And then like, as soon as they saw like maybe the tide was receding, you know, maybe they got some good publicity being like, oh, look, we're helping like houseless people of color or whatever. As soon as they saw like had any kind of excuse to like pull back their support, they're like, okay, that's enough. You know, as they usually would do. It's like, use that as an excuse. But I think it's up to, like, as Max said, it's like, I mean, that's part of like why we're doing this, is like to gather the people that are interested in this stuff, to start talking more about this. Because I do think, like, you know, as this rebellion continues on, it's like, it's more than just like police killing people. You know, it's like the whole system is like tied up in this thing. And I feel like it's really even evolving that way. People are like, you know, that's the most, you know, obvious example of like the system, but like so much of what's been going on here is like, it's really just kind of like an anti-system rebellion. And I think, you know, to move it to like the everyday, even though it is still happening every day in Portland, there's been like 95 straight days of like protests, street protests, but to make it like, you know, day in, day out work, like improving Black lives, it needs to move, you know, to areas of like shelter and food, and like, how do we like meet people's needs? Like not just people of color, but everyone who's like poor, but like centering that voice. But so that's part of like kind of why we're trying to do this, like who's interested in doing that kind of stuff. Like I'm definitely am, and Ibrahim actually has like direct experience doing that 10 years ago. So he's definitely a resource here in town to like, how do you actually do that? You know, like he kind of gave a little how-to earlier of like, oh, that's like, you know, technically, you know, like logistically how you do it. But like, you know, the way you do it is you get the people, well, one, you get like the people together, then you figure out what do we want, what do we demand, and who are we, you know, forcing to make that happen. And I think we actually do it with more pliable city council now than we did 10 years ago. We could be starting to make demands of like, we do want like, you know, some of these empty hotel rooms, which there's like thousands of empty hotel rooms in Portland right now. Like they just built thousands of hotel rooms that like are just sitting there empty. They've been empty for 6 months. There's really no sign they're gonna be filling up anytime soon. So like, if nothing, just temporary shelter, but like, why not just make it permanent, like SRO hotel, like hotel room? So there's a lot of things we could be demanding. We just need to like get together some sort of platform amongst groups that want to do that work. Any other questions?
This is Zai. Can I just add another thing?
Can you disable share screen?
Please go ahead, Zai.
Disable share screen.
Sure. So I also
Disable share screen so I can share screen from the name.
Can you do it? I can't.
No, don't worry about it.
Your host?
Can we get finances to turn off your mic so we can hear Zai's comment?
Oh yeah. Did you want to share screen?
Thanks, Max. Yeah, so this is Zai again, and I guess I just wanted to offer up, I was site manager at the social distancing shelter at the Oregon Convention Center through Multnomah County, and definitely was witness to a lot of really problematic stuff, and have been really wanting to like use that experience and that knowledge I have to be impactful, and especially as they like transition into these motel spaces for higher risk patient populations. So far, those are only available for people that are already in shelter systems, which is inherently ableist because those shelter systems are only really accessible for people who don't have substance use disorders, that don't have serious mental illness, that don't have, you know, like, yeah, essentially it's only really accessible for a certain type of houseless person. And so, yeah, I think that like, yeah, I would love to support any way of like putting pressure on Multnomah County around that emergency response and how like sorely, you know, inadequate it has been.
No one's talking.
All right, we got technical things we're trying to work out.
Oh,
Okay, hey folks. Looks like we are closing out here. Want to make sure folks are aware about the next event. So this project, as we mentioned, this webinar series and what'll be continuing on here as various series of events is Reclaim, Remain, Rebuild. So the next event is Remain, a community panel on land and housing, Saturday, September 26, 2020. We have it down from 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And for any of you who registered for this one, you know to just simply email us or link up with us via social media and let us know. If you look up Reclaim, Remain, Rebuild on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, we have accounts that are starting up for all of those. Please start to engage with those and like them and follow them and all that good stuff. We want to just, again, mention thanks so much to the Social Justice Action Center for hosting us for this event, because some of us are able to do that in person and be able to share space for people who also needed or wanted to. Again, thanks to KBU Community Radio. That's our community radio station here in Portland. If you're not in town, thanks a lot, KBU. Northwest Alliance for Alternative Media and Education, Symbiosis PDX, Right to Survive, Green Lens, Civil Liberties Defense Center, Portland Tenants United, the Office of Community and Civic Life, East Portland Community Office, Spark Plug Foundation, Southeast Uplift, and Green Lens. Again, some of those also help to fund us with the project. Reclaim, Remain, Rebuild is, as far as donating to the project or telling people how to donate to it, that is connected to the Northwest Alliance for Alternative Media and Education. And when you're at the Reclaim, Remain, Rebuild website, which is rrrpdx.org, again, that's rrrpdx.org, there's a link there that says, you know, get in contact and donate and things of that nature. So that's the way to do it for now. And we look forward to having y'all at the other one. Thanks so much to all of these great panelists and speakers, all the people who just participated, you know, showed up on Zoom here on a Sunday afternoon or evening for some of y'all, and also the folks who are here with us in Portland at the Social Justice Action Center that are either participating and or help to make it happen. So free the land, free them all, Black Lives Matter, stop the sweeps, and please keep in touch with us. And you can also email us at reclaimremainrebuild@gmail.com. So however folks want to plug in and stay in touch, we've tried to set up as many options and platforms in order to do so. So we want to thank y'all so much and have a great evening.
Keep in touch with us. Ali asked other folks who want to work on political ed to help legitimize community control of land. So keep in touch with us and we'll try and bring that to you as best we can.